All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel. We try to check out great theories of everything, ancient and modern, earth-shattering discoveries, magnum opuses, tour de forces, grand unified theories, all-encompassing theories, cosmologies that will change your life if you only knew about them. But most of the time they come from obscure sources, and we're here to bring those to you for your personal edification, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. And today is our 230 video that we've done on the Reciprocal Church, putting together new resources for spiritual practice, including meditation, ecstatic music, ecstatic dance, hardcore endurance training, and got some diet stuff in there. Also the reciprocal system of theories, ideas, sacred geometry, and quantum arithmetic, and all these things to kind of create a pragmatic praxis for kind of putting together your own do-it-yourself religion, do-it-yourself spirituality, in the wake of the collapse of our Western religions, which is imminent. And we don't know it yet because we haven't figured it out that the New Testament is fraudulent. The Old Testament is what's the word? Plagiarism. Plagiarized poorly from much older sources that talk about a bunch of gods with a small g, and that possibly the first chapter of Genesis talks about the real God, but that God is replaced by gods with a small g by the second chapter of Genesis. But anyway, we're mainly doing the New Testament right now, and we're going through a book here. It's really a booklet, like a pamphlet, written back in 1979 by Abelard Rushlin, and it's called The True Authorship of the New Testament. And this guy did a lot of digging. He read all these old documents in Greek, in Latin, in Hebrew, and maybe even other languages. And a lot of the kind of the letters that they wrote amongst each other to determine that the New Testament was written entirely by Roman elites, allies of the Caesars, mostly the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty, that being Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, from 69 to 96, and mainly in the earlier period with Titus and Vespasian from 69 to 81. I believe that Domitian actually wasn't in on the or wasn't down with the plan. Either was Nero not down with the plan of the committee to create a new Roman religion, where they wrote up stories that maybe they got them from the Dead Sea Scrolls, or maybe they just made them up, but they're layered with mockery, derision, and violence, subliminal violence, including a whole ton of like incestuous pedophilia, all kinds of double entendres and layered meanings within the books of the New Testament. But he's basically pinning it down to the family of Arius Piso, who was kind of behind the scenes guy, but he ended up being kind of the father of really all of the later Caesars, kind of after Domitian, and also the popes, going all the way into the Roman Empire and then up until the present day. So that's kind of how he breaks it down, and mainly again through studying the letters that they wrote from each other, and particularly Arius Piso, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Cicero. These were three of the famous Roman philosophers or writers who were in on the deal, and it's a very explosive work, but he does not provide as much detail as you would want. Can't really blame him, because he's the only person that's doing this kind of research. Although there were some precursors. A guy named Bruno Bauer had the Roman hypothesis way back in the 1870s. Ronald Syme, James Ballantyne Hannay. Syme, I believe, was working at Oxford, and he figured it out too. And many intellectuals going back way further in the past had figured it out, including the person known as William Shakespeare, Edgar Allan Poe, Cervantes. I believe it's a Russian. I believe it's Tolstoy. They all knew about this as well. So they wrote it with encoded language, but you can find the passages that shows that they knew what the game was. But he breaks it down here. So we were talking about, we're in a section that is just called the creation of the church. And he's at a place here on page 17 where we're talking about Suetonius. Also, Suetonius was one of the other writers from the 2nd century that the name of Jesus was really only mentioned by 4 people throughout the classical period. Only one in the 1st century, that was Josephus. And then also Tacitus, Suetonius, and one other who also mentioned Jesus in passing in one of their writings. But when you do the digging on these people, all of them were tight members of the Roman royal families. And so they're not to be trusted. This is propaganda that the Romans put together primarily in order to appease, mellow out the Jews, to give the Jews a hero that believed in turning the other cheek and rendering under Caesar what is Caesar's, and walking an extra mile with your pack, and belief that the centurion has greater faith than all of Israel, but that same soldier should not be asking for any more pay. Certain things like that kind of give the game away a little bit. But so we're just here talking about Suetonius, that he was historicizing the story appearing in Acts 18, verse 2, that Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. But perhaps he was hinting at the identity of him whom he was honoring with this account. For he deliberately this time misspelled Christus's name with an E instead of an I. Although he wrote in Latin, perhaps his intent was to make the spelling in Greek with the E. Total in small numbering, therefore 26, which is their I can't remember the exact name for the Greek numerology, isopepsis or something. But each one of these guys had like a different number, which was kind of like their signature. Piso had like 4 different numbers, depending on his alias, the various aliases that he used. The numbers total 26, and hence the same Calpurnius Piso by the sequence system instead of 22 if you spelled it normally as Christus. Suetonius cooperated perfectly, for his name was a pseudonym for his true name, Titus Antoninus. He was Claudia Phoebe's elder son and Piso's grandson. Piso had taken him into his home and reared him when his father Rufus died around the year 93. In the year 138, he would become emperor, and then do further writings under his pseudonyms as the Church Fathers. First, he wrote as Tatian. He said that the poor were enjoying Christian education gratuitously. Thus, the family had instituted free Christian schools to assist them in converting the poor to the new faith. Then, Tranquil and Toninus, that's part of Suetonius's name, Suetonius Tranquillus. So Tranquil Antoninus became Irenic when he created and wrote as Saint Irenaeus, a church father. In Irenaeus Against Heresies, he deliberately again misspelled Christos, this time as Christos with Chreistos. For this way it totaled 27 in Greek. Thus he could honor Pliny the Younger, as he had honored his grandfather. Okay, this is section 8. How to find Josephus as the author. Very few people even dream that Josephus and his family wrote the New Testament, because the world is attuned to pondering Jesus in terms of what did he mean, and not in terms of who wrote the story. The opposite is the case regarding Shakespeare. People wonder who wrote Shakespeare, and not what did he mean. Because if you ask what he meant, you would get a whole lot of question marks, unless you know the code. As Joseph Atwill has pointed out in his Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, which just came out 6-7 years ago, every one of Shakespeare's plays is on the topic of the authorship of the New Testament, and that it was done by the Romans. And Shakespeare was really a Jewish woman living at the court, a crypto Jew living at the court of Queen Elizabeth and I guess eventually King James in the early 17th century, late 16th, early 17th century. And every one of her plays was a counterattack to the original attack of Christianity on the Jews. You have to remember that the Jews and the Romans were basically fighting a nonstop war for over 100 years, from all the way from at least 63 BC up until 200 AD, or at least 130 AD, and the Gospels were a weapon in that war, used against the Jews. If you read the Gospels, you will see that it's completely pro-Roman and very much anti-Jew. The Jews are blamed for everything, including the killing of Jesus, and that's why this is very important. I mean, beside the fact that Christianity kind of dominates American life in many corners, but it also has a lot to do with anti-Semitism. Not to say that the Old Testament is free of any of this either. It's just kind of different. But, I would actually say that in spite of the fact that it was incestuous gay, pedophile, murderer, psychopaths who wrote the New Testament, it's still better than the Old Testament. So that's, you know, I'm not going to side on the take the side of the Jews here, but the offshoot of this gospel being accepted was 2,000 years of anti-Semitism and 1,500 plus, really 2,000 years of dark ages. You know, this is more than anything, this is what brought on the dark ages. So just, you know, taking this whole, you know, the Gospels were written as plays. These guys would go around to cities in Asia Minor and in Greece and in Egypt, and they would enact these plays with Jesus in them, the Gospels. And Piso would play Jesus, and his sons would play the apostles, and Pliny would play Paul, and you know, that's how they spread this propaganda. It was 100%, well, I don't know if it was 100% made up. It could have been based on some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But because the Dead Sea Scrolls have, you know, what do they call them? The teacher of righteousness. And they have the wicked priests, who could be the, you know, the high priest, Caiaphas. And they have the liar, which could be Judas or it could be Paul, depending on your interpretation. And so they could have still a kernel of truth in them, but when you look at this author and also Roman Piso, who came to the same conclusions independently, it's kind of overwhelming that these are completely made up and just a weapon of a continuing war between the Romans and the Jews. And Emilia Bassano, who's William Shakespeare, has tuned into this. So, you know, again, I think that this is a very important little booklet here. Not to say that I'm not saying that all of it is right, but why I think it's important is because you can verify it for yourself. You can go read Josephus. You probably can't go read it in its Greek, and he claims that the original is in Chaldee, but he says in the mother tongue. But since we know that he's an actual Roman and not a a Roman and not a Jew, then although Piso had some Jewish Herodian blood. So anyway, let's keep going. The opposite is the case regarding Shakespeare. People wonder who wrote Shakespeare and not what did he mean. If reversed, the questions would come through the veil, which is the mystery of the gospel. That is, of its actual authorship, and would thereby find Jesus in fact. And likewise, more would find the numerous inner circle allusions and clues in the Shakespearean writings. The way to pierce the veil is to ponder the New Testament and its brilliance, even though supposedly written by men so insignificant and that nothing is known of them nor of their families outside the pages of the New Testament. And then to think, who could have written such a brilliant book, which shows such complete knowledge of the life and times of first century Judea? Then a person may think of all the Josephs in the story, and of one of them being the reputed father of the baby. And if he has heard that writers have always written themselves into their stories, he may think of Josephus as the literary father of the baby and the creator of the story. Once he thinks of Josephus as the father of the baby and story, he may recall that Josephus in his Vita, his autobiography, listed the names of his 3 sons. Studying the names of the 3 Hyrcanus, Justus, and Simonides, quickly produces the names of the main disciples in the New Testament. Hyrcanus, known as Hyrcanus, John Hyrcanus. Josephus writes of the Maccabees, including John Hyrcanus, high priest. The first time he mentions him in the background portion of his Jewish War, that's Josephus's 7-volume work that he put out in the 70s CE. He hints by calling him John, also called Hyrcanus. The Justus, twice a James appeared in his Vita, which is his autobiography. His autobiography, as a bodyguard of Josephus. And once apparently the same bodyguard was named Justus. That made Justus a James, pseudonyms, and Justin and James, pseudonyms of each other. And Simonides, this was obviously a longer form of the name Simon. Once it is realized that Josephus created the Jesus story and that he himself played the roles of Josephs and the Jesuses, of the Josephs and of Jesus, and that he wrote his 3 sons into the 3 main disciples' roles, and that he was not born until the year 37 CE. This brings Jesus crashing off the wall. Having found Josephus and his 3 sons, the searcher can then begin to trace their careers and their repeated changes of names through the first 3 Gospels. You can also begin to find the numerous parallels which Josephus created in his public writings, particularly his autobiography, to remind one of the numbers, names, and events he had created in the Synoptic Gospels. A few examples are from the writings of Josephus. At about 14 years of age, Josephus was commanded by all for the love I had to learning. From the Gospels, when Jesus was 12 years old, his parents found him after 3 days in the temple conversing with the teachers. From Josephus, 12 Jews of Caesarea are sent as a delegation to Ecbatana. From the Gospels, Jesus appoints and sends out 12 apostles to preach and heal. From Josephus, 70 messengers are sent from Ecbatana to Caesarea. From the Gospels, Jesus appointed 70 others and sent them ahead of him. From Josephus, during this time before his purported surrender to the Romans, I was now about 30 years old. From the Gospels, Jesus commenced his ministry when he was 30 years of age. From Josephus, Josephus's quarters were in a Galilean village named Cana. From the Gospels, Jesus attended a wedding in Cana, then came to Cana again. From Josephus, Josephus told his friends that in 3 days' time he would quit the district and go home. See, he could have found a better example than that. But here we go with from the Gospels. Jesus prophesies that he will be raised up on the 3rd day. There's an episode in Wars of the Jews where Josephus is actually buried for 3 days underground and then is brought out. That's much more germane than what he's talking about here. Josephus told his friends that in 3 days' time he would quit the district and go home. Josephus was buried under Jerusalem, or it was Jotapata, for 3 days and then miraculously got out. So I think he cites two more examples here, but I think it's a very limited list. When we look at the work of Michael Menescatz, he will show that there are 250 parallels between Josephus's Wars of the Jews and just the book of Luke. 250 in the book of Luke, not just the whole New Testament. There's thousands of them in the New Testament. And he doesn't do a great job of selecting his 8 right here. But from Josephus also has, I believe, like 6 or 7 characters in his Wars of the Jews named Jesus. And I believe all of them are kind of parodying or paralleling, at least, the Jesus of the Gospels. So here in Josephus, he says, Jesus, chief magistrate of Tiberias, accuses Josephus of embezzling 20 pieces of gold. They laid hands on him and attempted to kill him. From the Gospels, Judas goes to the priest and obtains 30 pieces of silver for betraying Jesus. And from Josephus notices 3 of his acquaintances had been crucified, so he entreats to take them down. 2 of them die, but 1 recovers. And obviously, from the Gospels, 2 robbers were crucified on either side of Jesus, and only 1 recovers. Jesus rises. Having studied the first 3 Gospels, one then begins to read Acts of the Apostles and attempts to continue tracing Josephus and his sons in their various literary alter egos through the story. But he encounters a problem. The names start to be Roman, and new people, not pseudonyms of the family, begin to appear, such as Gaius, Secundus, Cornelius, and Timothy. So one must delve into Roman history and writings in search of more clues. Soon he finds Pliny the Younger, the only Roman governor who is known to have persecuted Christians, it says, allegedly, because he writes about doing so. Now, I'm not sure if this is Pliny the Younger. Then when one reads Pliny's letters, he finds his dear friend Fabius Justus, which is Arian Piso's son. Immediately, the reader recalls this same name, Justus, as that of Josephus's son. Pliny's wife is found to be Calpurnia, the granddaughter of Calpurnius. And Fabitus reminds us of Flavius and its possible variant Fabius. By studying Pliny's letters further, the searcher finds Josephus appearing under various other names, such as Arius Antoninus, Titinius Capito, Titius Aristo, Valerius Paulinus. He also sees Josephus's other sons appearing and deciphers their true names. John is really Julius. Simon is really Proculus. Pliny's letters introduce the family members, including Josephus's grandsons, under various names. And they also introduce the friends of Josephus and Pliny under actual names and pseudonyms. Then one can also begin to read the other Roman writers of that day, including historians Tacitus and Suetonius. They too supply hints and assorted pseudonyms of the various members of the family. Now the searcher is able to continue his deciphering of the true identities of the fictional characters in Acts and the Epistles. This section is called The Proof that Josephus was really Calpurnius Piso. By now, the reader should well understand how Josephus was found to be the author of the Jesus story in the Synoptic Gospels. That he was the Joseph writing himself in as the Father and as Jesus, and writing his 3 sons in as the 3 main disciples. And because Josephus was not born until the year 37 CE, the effect was to prove Jesus a fictional alter ego of Josephus. And the reader will have understood, too, the proofs that Calpurnius Piso inserted himself and his family repeatedly, by numbers and other methods, into the Gospels, and that he apparently was Josephus. But the reader will still wonder how the transition was made. How does one, realizing Josephus created the story, come to the conclusion that he was in fact Calpurnius Piso? Also, Arius Calpurnius Piso. There is a great mystery in the figure of Flavius Josephus. Here is a supposed descendant of Hasmonean royalty, that's the Maccabees, the royal family of the Jews from the 2nd century. Descendant of Hasmonean royalty, who, according to his own writings, after apparently defending Galilee and its town of Jotapata bravely, flees to a cave. Then, after his companions commit suicide, himself surrenders to the Romans and is spared. Now, maybe I'm reading Wars of the Jews wrong because I'm reading it in English. I'm reading the English translation, but there's so much more to that story that he leaves out. This is the story where he flees to the cave. He's in there for 3 days. There are 40 other Jews in there, and they make a suicide pact, and they draw lots to see who's the first person killed, and who's the second person killed, and who's the third person killed. And they finally, there's 40 of them, they finally get down to the last 2 people, and Josephus is one of the last 2 people. And then they finally said, well, forget it then. We'll just both survive. And so then they escape from the cave, and he surrenders to Vespasian. And he gives Vespasian the star prophecy, saying that, Vespasian, I predict that someday you're going to become the emperor. And he also defects to the Romans. And then when Vespasian actually does become emperor, he gets Josephus out of his war POW situation and brings him to Rome as the court historian and adopts him as his family member. So his name is now Flavius Josephus. So for some reason, he leaves all that out. But let's keep going. Well, actually, we can't keep going because we're out of time. But we'll get back into this at this location when we resume tomorrow. So thanks for tuning in today.